It's lovely to have you with us this morning. Thank you very much for joining our webinar this morning, all around engaging with contractors compliantly. One of the very hot topics, I think you'll agree, at the moment. Okay, with that in mind, I think is the really great time to start. So thank you once again, everybody, for joining. Just by way of introduction, let's get started. So for those of you that have not joined one of our webinars before, here's a little bit about the Curve Group. We are really proud to say that we are a leading privately owned provider of recruitment and HR outsource solutions in the UK. We provide configurable outsource solutions across the entire life cycle, and our outsource solutions are underpinned by a range of complementary specialist consultancy and product services. Our solutions can be configured to support businesses of all shapes and sizes, from SMEs and challenger brands right the way through to FTSE 250 businesses. And one of the things that we're delighted to say, as well as being fully embedded into a business, our solutions can be wrapped around just to complement your existing teams and functions, providing additional expertise and scalability when you need it most. We are incredibly proud of what we do here at the Curve Group, and here on the screen now are just a small selection of some of the awards that we've won over our period of time of delivering. And you can see very nicely there that we do have a best contractor recruitment agency within the financial services kind of arena. So a little bit about us today and who's delivering. So my name's Anna Clapton. I'm head of HR consultancy. I'm delighted to be joined by Charlotte and Sam. Charlotte looks after our consultancy contract element of our business, and Sam is head of our marketing and insights, and you will hear from both of them today. The webinar is being recorded, and that link will come out to you in due course. In addition to that, we've got about 30 minutes all inclusive, and that includes time for Q&A. But as always, please reach out to us independently afterwards if you feel best to do so. Or in addition to that, please use any of the chat or the Q&A facilities that you've got within your toolbar. So let's just take a look at what's coming up today. We're going to look at an update on IR35, the Criminal Finances Act 2017, screening and vetting practices, T's and C's and working practices, agency checks, your options for managing contractors, maintaining contracts compliance, and then what we love to do is bring to life some case studies of how we've worked with these people in the past. I think the final thing for me to say is really what our aim of today's webinar is: how to engage contractors compliantly and adhere to all of the applicable legislation while securing the interim talent that you need. What I'm going to do now is hand over to Charlie. We are having a few technical issues this morning, so I very much hope that you can hear us and everything is working well. So Charlie, over to you.
Okay, thanks Anna. So to recap, IR35 is a piece of tax legislation designed to combat disguised employment, where a contractor gets the tax benefits of working for a limited company whilst carrying out what is essentially a BAU role. The initial legislation was introduced in the year 2000 and had the contractor taking responsibility for determining their IR35 status. Then in 2017, first reforms saw the end user or client being responsible for the determination for contract roles in the public sector. And then in 2021, which was delayed from April 2020, this was rolled out in the private sector. I suppose for us at the Curve Group, things really started stepping up in 2015, when we started to have to provide quarterly reporting to HMRC on all contractors we were payrolling. This includes the end user and details of what was being paid. And for the first time, this really gave HMRC all the data they needed to decide who to investigate. But I suppose the other thing inside of all this is you may have contracts in place with the contractor, which has been carefully written by lawyers and accountants to be outside IR35. However, when any assessments and I suppose more importantly, when HMRC do any audits, this is actually based on what happens in practice and not what the contract states. Can you move? Thanks, Anna. So there's some new research by IPSE, which is the Association of Independent Professionals and the Self-Employed, which has shown that out of the 500,000 self-employed workers in the UK at the start of the pandemic, with the pandemic and IR35, we've lost 35% of those workers. But actually, let's move on and look at what's been happening more recently. So, on September the 23rd, the newly appointed Prime Minister, Liz Truss, announced the government's decision to repeal the IR35 off-payroll working rules with effect from the 6th of April 2023. So it would have gone back to contractors being responsible for making their own IR35 status determinations. And as you can imagine, this was met with much joy by the contractor population. But after the huge backlash from the measures announced during the mini-budget, Kwasi Kwarteng was being replaced by Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor of the Exchequer, who then announced, as you are all aware, amongst other things, that the IR35 reforms would stay. So I suppose it's also worth noting that prior to being appointed as Prime Minister, when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, he introduced the initial 2021 reform. So the repeal that Liz Truss put on the table is very unlikely to ever get a review. So, just to kind of confirm, from the 6th of April 2023, the responsibility for making IR35 status determinations in both the public and private sector is going to revert back to contractors from the client's end business. It was hoped, and I think this is why there was such joy, that the repeal of the reforms, which had only come into place in April 21, would encourage a more flexible labour market and ease shortages that we're experiencing. So IR35 advisor Kudos states that 36% of private sector contractors work outside of IR35, and it's worth noting that 77% of contractors in that piece of research believe that their status has not fairly been set by the client. And this is almost creating a branding issue where, because of the IR35 legislations, contractors are becoming unhappy with their own clients. So, just as a bit of a recap, there are four main principles that determine IR35 status. And understanding these four principles at a high level is important in determining if someone is inside IR35. So let's just take them one at a time. So the right to substitution. As a business, you need to be comfortable that you are buying a service that does not need to be completed by a specific individual. Essentially, I suppose you have to be happy, or at least be able to accommodate that the limited company from which you are purchasing the service is able to substitute another worker in to carry out the services, provided whoever turns up is suitably qualified and experienced. It should not matter who completes the work, as long as the work is completed to a good standard. In the context of IR35, a right to substitute means a contractably enforceable right for a limited company to replace its representative, subject to only reasonable criteria such as suitability. And I think this is the hardest principle for clients to kind of get their heads around. The next one is mutuality of obligation. This is a test of employment. It looks at the relationship between a contractor and their client to ensure it does not resemble that of an employee and an employer. If you are buying the services of a contractor, you are not obliged to provide the contractor with ongoing work, and they are not obliged to accept it. When a company is obliged to provide paid work and a contractor is obliged to then accept and complete the work, this is considered mutuality of obligation, making the relationship more like an employee and an employer. genuinely limited company contractors should never expect or receive new charity of obligation. Self-employed workers are instead engaged on a contract for their services, and this means they are paid to perform a specific task or complete a project, and when that is completed, the contract comes to an end. So control, this is essentially referring to the ability for the hirer to control or feel they have the right to control a contractor. For example, if a hiring manager plans or supervises work, or they have control over what, when, where and how they carry out the work, or they do not allow the worker discretion over the working hours and locations in which they operate. So the idea is you are bringing in external capability that you do not currently have in your business to deliver. Therefore, it would be inappropriate to have control over how the work is done. And then the last high-level item is part and parcel. This is essentially a consideration of how embedded the worker has become into a business. Do they have to introduce themselves, or how do they introduce themselves to clients and suppliers? Do they have corporate benefits? Is there a subsidised canteen they're using? Do they come to Christmas parties? They need to behave, and you need to encourage them to behave like an independent worker. So thanks, Anna. It used to be the case that certain answers would mean assignments were automatically put inside or outside IR35, but that's not the case now. HMRC has got much more sophisticated, and it's all about a balanced look and assessment of the situation. The government refreshed the CESS tool, Check Employment Status for Tax, in 2020. It's best practice to complete an IR35 determination before you advertise an assignment, and then repeat this once you've identified who will be doing the work. And as I think some of you on this webinar know, the CESS tool has around 30 or 40 questions, depending on what answers you give. And it will produce a report at the end that gives a recommendation on what the tax status of the worker should be. On this slide, I won't go into them, but there are a few examples of things that will help either put an assignment inside or outside IR35. Some cases are really clean cut. However, it's all about painting a picture of how the assignment is going to be carried out. You must then ensure that the answers you give are genuinely reflected in what's actually happening in the day-to-day execution from the point of view of both the business and the worker. So as well as IR35, to be compliant legally, there is also the Criminal Finances Act that needs to be taken into consideration. So this came into force in September 2017. It's a blanket piece of legislation, unlike IR35, that is all around preventing tax evasion. And it's a bit like the Bribery Act, that it's looking for failure to prevent an offence as opposed to actually looking at the offence. So there's an unlimited fine and criminal records for businesses that are convicted under this act. And it's all about showing that you've got reasonable procedures to prevent the facilitation of tax evasion. So these must be in place in order to be able to create a defence. And these businesses are vicariously liable for the criminal acts of their employees and other associated persons. So this means contractors as well. So whilst the contractor is performing services for your business, this piece of legislation applies. And it's a strict liability. It actually doesn't matter if the managers in your business don't know what's happening. They need not to have actually participated in or even suspected that the business or associated person was avoiding paying tax. It's just that this hasn't been prevented. So if someone in your business has facilitated tax evasion, It's the whole business that is criminal liability, not that individual. And in terms of tax evasion, facilitation is when someone is taking steps with the aim of, or to be knowingly involved in the fraudulent evasion of tax by another person, or helping to assist or promote that offence. So in a sense, what it means is if you have contractors in your business who have a non-compliant tax scheme to evade tax, or if somebody, for example, in your business puts a contract assignment outside IR35, knowing that that contract should be inside, they are facilitating tax evasion. So hopefully that's a bit of a journey through quite a nasty piece of legislation. So to keep your business safe, as well as steering through the Criminal Finances Act and IR35, your teams or your agencies should be checking your contractors have the right to work in the UK and that they are who they say they are. Depending on the nature of the role, carrying out further screening and background checks are definitely recommended here. So things like credit checks, fraud checks, confirmation of education and professional qualifications. And contractors should also hold public liability and professional liability insurance, and if applicable, employer's liability. And these not only need to be checked when the contract starts, but it's worth keeping the renewal date somewhere so that we can check that they are renewing them. And if you are contracting directly with contractors, T's and C's need to be up to date and in line with current legislation. And it's also really important that those T's and C's cover the right to substitution. And then working practices, not the contractor, what HMRC will look at during an investigation. So it's super important that these align with the status determination. If outside of IR35, remember, they can't manage the team, they can't have budget responsibility, they can't have control. And what we actually do is we send out a booklet to our contractors, just reminding them of the principles and the working practices, so that if at any point they feel that there's an issue, they can come back to us. And again, if you are engaging contractors through agencies, what checks should you be doing on any agencies that are engaging contractors on your behalf? Policies and processes should be in place covering IR35 and also the Criminal Finances Act. Least of all, ensuring that a contractor has a written IR35 status determination before any work is done. And sometimes you have an agency who's very enthusiastic to get the contractor on board and up and running, and this step may be missed. Do the contracts meet legislative requirements? It's always worth having a quick look at an agency on Companies House and checking a bit of their background history. Do they have appropriate insurance cover to cover your business should something go wrong? Do they have the sufficient financial ability to pay the contractor for the life of the contract? Not only are unpaid contractors unhappy contractors, but if the agency does get into financial difficulty, the IR35 risk can move up the supply chain. So just a quick look at the different ways of employing contractors or contingent workers inside IR35. So when the legislation first came in 2021, there was a big shift towards contractors moving into permanent roles and FTCs. So if a contractor role is deemed to be inside IR35, you might want to consider that role. Again, if a role falls inside, you may use a recruitment agency to contract directly with the worker, so they deduct tax and NI, essentially employing them as a temp. Umbrella companies are obviously widely used, and we certainly use them a lot. So you use an umbrella company to directly employ the worker and deduct tax and national insurance. They're not so popular with contractors who have their own limited companies, because obviously they're paying for insurance, accountants, IT, and all the facilities of their own company. So there's a duplicate cost in there. And also, umbrella is not a word that is, or a concept that is defined by HMRC. So if a business tells you it's an umbrella company, it doesn't mean that it actually is. So we do strict due diligence on any umbrella companies in terms of their background and finances before we put them onto our PSL. There's also deemed employment, which is really good when a contractor has multiple contracts in and out of IR35. So an agency like ourselves would deduct the tax and national insurance from the contractor. You could do a statement of work, so completely restructure how you actually create the contract and look at it being based on outputs and milestones as opposed to time and materials. But again, labelling a contract as a statement of work can't just be a paper exercise. It has to represent what's actually happening on a day-to-day level. So HMRC will again look at what's actually happening. So the repeal is not happening. IR35 is here to stay in its current form. So following the initial knee-jerk reaction in 2021, when clients either banned PSCs or put in place onerous processes for their HR teams and hiring managers to protect the business, we're now seeing clients beginning to tweak these processes, having lived with IR35 for well over a year, and understanding that it's a balancing act around business risk and actually what the business needs are, and making the IR35 legislation work for you and your business. Along that, have you done all you can to protect the business? If it's a conscious choice that your business has made not to follow best practice, and maybe look at mitigating risk and how you bring contracts into business, just need to make sure that the right people in the business are aware of this and the risks involved. That's also, there's one thing we're seeing in the marketplace at the moment is a shift in the contractual marketplace. Are you able to actually access the skills and talents you need under the policies and processes you currently have in place? One big thing is by making the decision not to work with PSCs, clients are almost creating a two-tier marketplace, while those with the high demand skills are able to work outside of IR35 and name their price, which means that those clients that are only working with umbrella contractors are actually losing out on some of the talents in the marketplace. And is that actually achieving what your business needs? Also, are your internal and external comms sufficient to make sure everyone is aware of what their responsibilities are around contract compliance? And regular checks and reviews of the contract book will avoid slippage and ensure things are working in the best way. And we are about to talk about some case studies, and I suppose my last thought is that if having visibility and control of your contract book is fantastic, but it's only the first step. You actually need to be able to maintain this. So I'll now hand over to Sam, who's going to talk you through some of our recent case studies.
Thank you, Charlie. That was really helpful. Like Charlie said, I just want to take you through very, very quickly, because I'm mindful of time, a handful of case studies of some contractor audits that we delivered. These were all cards on the table actually undertaken before the IR35 reforms were rolled out in the private sector. So IR35 reforms aside, what I'm trying to bring to life here is actually the scale of some of the risks that we found in three very different businesses actually. So one of them was a large, well-known utilities company, huge amount of customers, quite a steady contractor usage, sort of 40 to 50 active contractors at any given time. We had a large wealth management business with almost double the amount of contractors, and also finally a major leisure organisation who had about 30 contractors typically within their head office function. It's kind of trying to serve as a bit of a cautionary tale on why we keep coming back to this topic of compliant contractor utilisation, time and time again. But the real big red flag that we found within all three of these businesses, and it's very common actually in a lot of the businesses that we encounter, is because they're not permanent talent, because they're being sourced from lots of different people. Sometimes hiring managers are hiring contractors directly. Sometimes it's through, statement of works. There was no single person or team within any three of these organisations that we audited who actually had full responsibility, visibility, control or oversight of the full population of contractors. So clearly when there is so much at risk from an organisational perspective in terms of the Criminal Finances Act and now IR35, plus all of the other due diligence that you should be doing to protect your business, insurances, etc., that's a massive red flag, and that's quite scary. And also, just to bring to life some more of the results that we found, again, quite alarming. On average, across those three organisations, we actually found that the business we asked them to estimate roughly how many contractors they thought they had, and the numbers they gave us once we completed the audits were actually 44% lower than what they thought they had. So we found a lot more contractors within the business that they were not even aware of. But regardless of whether they were aware of them or not, there's still massive risk there. There's still a contractor in an organisation. That's a huge amount of uplift in terms of risk of things probably not being well managed. Contracts were out of date. There was very little evidence kind of in an organised file anywhere in terms of structure around what checks had been completed, making sure that they were being monitored in terms of working practices. Lots of data missing, lots of inconsistent data, and actually quite scary. So just to kind of bring it to life, there is a very real risk from all of the points that Charlie's talked through in terms of managing that contractor population compliantly. And it is a risk that can be managed and can be mitigated as long as you have got those processes in place. And actually, just out the backside of the audits that we completed, not only did we identify those areas of risk and pockets for the organisations and give them solutions on how they can reduce and seriously minimise that risk, but there was also quite a vast cost saving in the models that we gave them too. So I think even if you're not concerned about the kind of the risk base, there is always an opportunity to look at actually, are you spending right for your business? Is there an opportunity to bring somebody on as a permanent member of staff? Because actually it could all stack up to quite considerable savings. So hopefully that was useful. We have got a full version of that case study. If it's something that any of you would like to read in detail, then do please reach out after this webinar. So just to wrap up, thank you very much to Charlie and Anna for hosting today. We hope it was useful. We can open the mics now. We can keep an eye on the Q&A function. So if you've got any questions, now is the time. While I let you think about whether you've got any questions, we also have got contact details coming up on the next slide, so do please let us know if you'd rather reach out separately. We've got Richard, I think you've raised your hand, if we can find the Q&A and see if we can open your mic and pass you over to Charlie for questions. Bear with. Okay, Richard, thank you. I think you should be able to speak now if you want to ask Charlie a question.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, can.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Just a question on the Criminal Finances Act. How can we go about actually vetting? If we feel that we've contracted correctly, we've assessed correctly, we've paid them correctly, but then the contractor is creative in how they pay themselves, how do we, so through their own limited company, how can we actually facilitate that check that they aren't being creative and they are compliant in their bookkeeping? Because if we're at risk under that sort of Criminal Finances Act, we can do every check possible, but they're still then paying themselves in a odd way.
It is about the prevention and putting in place reasonable procedures to show that you have tried to prevent it, as opposed to belt and braces, checking every payment the contractor makes. So depending on how you're engaging, and it's things like not paying into offshore bank accounts, just fairly obvious steps to show that you're doing something about it and making sure that there's no limited opportunity for facilitation.
Okay, thank you.
That's great, thank you very much. I can't actually see any more questions coming up. So as I say, what we will do is our contact details are up on the screen anyway. We will obviously send out the recording for you probably within 24 to 48 hours. So please do reach out if there is anything else that you want any support with. I think finally, just to conclude where we are at the moment, we are always here to give you a helping hand. So in terms of contractors, obviously we could do sourcing of contractors and the CVs to stakeholders, coordination of umbrella companies. We absolutely can do employment screening and full vetting, negotiation on rates and terms, compliance check-ins, onboardings, contractor portals for timesheeting, and that helps with obviously payroll and expenses and the provision of a single consolidated invoice as well. As you know, we like to continually run our webinars, so we are going to squeeze another one in for the end of the year, which is all about what's on the horizon for HR in 2023. And we've already got our January webinar title up and running as well, which is all around recruitment process outsourcing 101. So an introduction to RPOs if it's not something you're familiar with. Finally, on behalf of Sam and Charlie today, I'd just like to say thank you very much for attending. As always, it's been a pleasure to have you with us today, and thank you very much.